Edwards, the handoff, quick trigger, Irving, 60! 60! Kyrie Irving!
Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard Podcast. On today's episode, going to be starting a new series called the Eulogy series. And basically, I just want to chronicle each team's journey into the afterlife that is the off season. Basically, just want to discuss each team's season as well as look forward towards the off season and beyond as they get eliminated from playoff contention. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe for weekly content. Also, the podcasts are now up on Spotify, so you can listen to the full episode uninterrupted there. And if there's a spot you agree with, disagree with, either reach out to us on Twitter or in that comment section, and we'd love to discuss with you. Let's kick things off with the Magic here. Both Clayton and I were under on their 22.5 wins for the season. Both of us hit the under mark. I actually didn't think that they would even hit the 20 win mark. Currently, they're sitting at 18-53, which is only the second worst record in the league. And both my 20 win projection and their 23 win mark are still on the board for them. It's also not inconceivable that they wouldn't hit either of those marks. So it's kind of a race to 20 wins for them, but more likely what they're after is the race to the bottom of the league. Right now, race to last place with Detroit and Houston. So what went wrong this season? Well, with Clayton and I's predictions, as well as the Vegas over-under number, it was clear going into the season that this would be one of, if not the worst team in the league. So it's really not even as if the team is underperformed. And I could get into all the team stats as to why they don't win games, but the reality is this was a team that had a fire sale at the deadline last season. They moved off of arguably the three most important players. At the very least, it was three of their starters, and that was the right decision. And while that group with Vucevic, Gordon, and Fournier, that core, they had some playoff success. They had made the playoffs and won a game here or there. It was clear that the best that group was going to be able to accomplish was going to be a low playoff seed and maybe take a game in the first round. You're talking like a 4 or 5 game series in the first round, and that was kind of the best of what they were going to be able to accomplish. So it was just time to move on. And that's what's led them to the place that they're in this season with a very young roster that has some talent, but very little proven talent. It's really as simple as that. And as bad as it was this year, I think it's okay for them. For a small market team that's basically starting from scratch now, there's a lot to be positive about here. Franz Wagner, the 8th pick in this past year's draft, he looks like a real player. He's a player that you can build around. And while he might not have best player on a championship team type potential, he was never really expected to be that. And he's been much better than expected. He's just a really versatile player. And if you look back at his draft profile, his ability to shoot the three and ability to create his own shot were called into question. And both of those things he's shown an ability to do at the NBA level. Maybe he's not the face of the franchise type guy, but I think as a solid starter or third option, I think he could definitely be that down the line on a championship team. There's also second-year point guard Cole Anthony. He's notable, 17 points a game, 5 assists, 5 rebounds. And his leadership and competitiveness has really rubbed off on the other guys on the team. Despite what their record says, Orlando is not an automatic win on the schedule. You can't just show up, put in half effort, and expect to beat this team. A lot of that competitive spirit and fight can be attributed to Cole Anthony. And as a player, I'm a little bit more bearish on him than I am Wagner. 39% field goals, 34% on threes. That just leaves a lot to be desired. He could be the case that he's a good stats, bad team guy, but I'm not willing to commit to that with him yet. I think the reality is defenses are really keying in on him just because of the lack of talent in Orlando. You can really hone in on him for a defensive game plan because there's not a lot of other options scoring the ball wise. And he's being asked to be a franchise carrying player. And like Wagner, it's just unlikely that that's who he is as a player. Also, as I mentioned, this is only his second year. So I think there's reasons to be really excited about that pair. And with Anthony's efficiency specifically, if they're able to get in a franchise type player, be it a young rookie or whatever, and he moves into more of the background, be it a second option, third option, fourth option, whatever, I think you'll see that efficiency start to come up as there's a lot less pressure on him to create offense. And while Cole Anthony has mostly left you as an Orlando fan with reasons to be excited, this year's version of Suggs has left you with mostly concerns. Suggs was the 5th pick in the draft this past year, and he was thought of going in by some analysts as a face of the franchise type guy, future all-star, future all-NBA guy, and at least thus far, that just doesn't appear to be the case. In our preview, Clayton really liked him coming out of the draft, but I was really less convinced. I don't watch a ton of college basketball, but when I watched the national title game, what I saw against Baylor really concerned me. Suggs just really struggled to beat the Baylor guards off the dribble, and those Baylor guards are the type of athletes that he would eventually go up in again in the NBA, and the type of athletes that he's now facing now that he's in the NBA. And those off the dribble issues seem to have persisted. Now, I'm not saying he's a bust by any means. He's relatively new to basketball, so it's likely in high school and even at Gonzaga in a weaker conference, he was able to overwhelm his opponents with his athletic ability and never needed to develop the craftiness side of his game. So he could figure out that component with some time, especially being new to basketball. Now, even if he doesn't make any drastic improvements, I don't expect him to be a 30% field goal shooter, 20% on threes guy. He's still a solid free throw shooter this season, and he's had some injuries this year, so that could have stunted his development, certainly. I still think he could be a really solid player. And I think at worst, I talked about in the midseason video, I think the worst case scenario for him would be a guy like Marcus Smart. He seems like a guy who could be talked into really buying in on the defensive end. And if he puts his focus there and then on the catch and shoot side, he could be a really valuable big guard with some ball skills. If I were able to sign up for a version of Marcus Smart where he doesn't take stupid shots, I'm taking that 10 times out of 10 on my team. Now, heading into the offseason, sadly for Orlando here, their fate going forward is going to be tied to the ping pong balls. At least lately, that doesn't seem to be going in their favor, but hopefully for their sake, that changes soon. It seems like they're always kind of just on the outside looking in of like the top tier guys. If it's a 2-man draft, they're picking 3rd. If it's a 5-person draft, they're picking 6th. They're just always on the outside looking in, at least recently. Obviously, much earlier in their franchise's history, like when they first started, they had some really good luck when it comes to the draft lottery. And if the ping pong balls do fall their way this offseason, they are positioned really well to grab the top 3 guys in this draft with the way their roster is constructed. With Wendell Carter holding it down at the 5, you could pair like a Chet, the Jabari Smith, Paolo Banchero. You can pair those guys easily with a 5-man like Wendell Carter. Wagner can play the 3, Cole Anthony can play the point, and then whoever you want can play that off guard, be it Markelle Fultz, be it Jalen Suggs, Terrence Ross, or anybody that you happen to pick up. That's a really solid young team and something that you can clearly build around. It's also not likely going to be a team that's going to win a ton of games. So if you nail the pick in the following year's draft, things are really starting to look up here. But on the flip side, if Orlando falls out of the top 3, it's really not a great scenario for them to be in this year. You're likely looking at guards outside of that top 3. And with Orlando, they already have a huge logjam at the guard position. I guess they could grab a forward like Griffin and move Franz to the 4, or Jalen Duren, but I don't really like the Duren and Carter combination. I don't think that would work in the NBA. And in general, I think that if you're Orlando or a team like Orlando, the best player available strategy in the draft is the way to go. But the guard situation here could really stunt the growth of a guy that you draft or the guys that you already have on the roster, given just how many guards you have that you would like to play. And that kind of brings me to the next segment here of the offseason. It's kind of the decisions that and moves that Orlando will likely need to make during the offseason. I mentioned Markelle Fultz. He's under contract next year and the following year, and he's likely a guy that you're wanting to move off because of that logjam that you have at the guard position. since he's often hurt and doesn't shoot the three ball well, it's likely that not many teams are going to be interested in him at that salary figure. But if you can get off of him for like an expiring contract, or at worst take on a worse contract and maybe get a draft pick back, I think it's worth it to move off of him. You still have RJ Hampton, you still have Terrence Ross. Gary Harris is a guard who's going to be a free agent, but I can't see a case for the Magic re-signing him. So if they're able to get rid of Fultz, it's Terrence Ross, Cole Anthony, Jalen Suggs, RJ Hampton as the guard, as the guards. And I think that's pretty solid. But I think Terrence Ross is going to be a really interesting piece for them to possibly trade. I think they could get some assets back for him. And speaking of him, he has some value, and he's going to be on an expiring contract, and it's an affordable contract. And for a team looking to compete right away, he's a veteran who can provide instant offense off the bench for him, for a team. And what Orlando should expect back from him is something like what the Pacers got for Karis LeVert, maybe a protected first or maybe a young asset. Not a huge haul, but something. Terrence Ross isn't really helping you in the short term and on an expiring contract. He may not necessarily want to sign back on for a rebuilding project. So best to capitalize on whatever you can value-wise from him before he walks out the door for nothing, basically. They also have a weird situation with Jonathan Isaac. He's a guy who I love, but he's had some major injury issues. And for as far as potential, his potential is sky high. He's got defensive player of the year written all over him, but he's a guy that just can't stay on the court. And with the emergence of Franz Wagner and the financial commitment that they've made to Isaac, do they want to move off of him? I think if you could get an unprotected pick that is likely to be a very high draft pick, I'm taking that as Orlando. I think I would be really excited about that. At least, the very least, to move off of the financial commitment that they've made to him. But otherwise, if I'm not really getting much back in an Isaac trade, I would be much more interested in potentially pairing him with Franz Wagner and maybe Wendell Carter, or potentially if you grab a guy like Chet. Lengthwise, defensively, that could just be a really special team. I mean, you're rolling out there with the 6'10-ish Isaac, Chet Holmgren. He's shown that he's a good defender, at least a good rim protector at 7+ feet. And then you've got Franz Wagner, who's 6'9". Like that would be a really tough team to deal with. And we've seen with Toronto this year that the length and athleticism that can go a long way. That can take you into the playoffs at the very least. Big free agency decisions wise, I mentioned Gary Harris. He's likely gone. Robin Lopez as well. And then meme wise, they do have a decision to make with Bol, and I know 2K players everywhere are hoping for the chance to pair Bol with Chet. But if we're being honest about this, it doesn't really matter for Orlando. Keep him, let him walk. It's not going to affect the destiny of their team. I think that potential is still there with Bol, but how patient are we willing to be here? You know, what is it now? 4 years down the line, 3 years down the line, something like that. I don't know how many more seasons we're going to be willing to wait on Bol to even make an appearance on the court. Mo Bamba is the really big decision that Orlando has ahead of them. And as I mentioned earlier, they've made a pretty big financial commitment to Wendell Carter at the center. So if you couple that with the fact that they were shopping Bamba at the deadline, it's likely that he's not on the team next season. Orlando might want to reconsider that, especially in the scenario where they fall out of the top 3 in the draft and don't end up grabbing one of those big guys. So the qualifying offer for Bamba is only somewhere in the $10 million range. Is anyone paying Mo Bamba more than that? Not likely. And if they are, it's likely that you're going to be able to get something back in a sign and trade type scenario. I still believe in Bamba as a player, not as a generational center or an all-star level player like he had the potential to be entering the draft, but as a really solid role player. If you think about him this way, he's a 36% three-point shooter, so just imagine him in a Brook Lopez style role. Limit him to mostly spot-up shooting with pick and pops and maybe the odd roll to the basket just with his athletic ability. And then defensively, he's going to block shots. I mean, he's huge. He's got a huge wingspan. He's really athletic. And already he's a really solid help side defender. Now, on the ball, he leaves a lot to be desired, but he might figure that out eventually. He's still fairly young, and he's certainly athletic enough to be a capable on-ball defender. So if you frame him like that, like just as a more athletic Brook Lopez, you don't get the post scoring like you do with Lopez. But if you're a team, even like the Bucks, we'll just say that Brook Lopez hangs them up after this season. I don't expect him to, but he could fill in for that role very effectively in spots for maybe 15, 20 minutes a game. And that's a solid player. But moving on to like Orlando's approach to free agency, be it players that they are looking to grab. Obviously, they're not going to go big game hunting for the guys like Beal or Harden. And I don't really think they should even push for like the next tier of players, your 30 through 50 in terms of rankings in the of players in the league. It's just not a team that's ready for playoff contention, and you don't want to end up in a situation where you're pushing for the playoffs too soon and you end up right back where you were with a team that is capable of maybe taking a game in the first round but is a first round out at best. Just grab some young players who were in bad situations, or some young players who have kind of been forgotten about, or you can just roll it out with the young core that you have. Maybe you want to see a little bit more from them. And then also, I think it's important to bring in some good veterans. And I don't necessarily mean good as in good in terms of what you get on the court, but just good locker room guys who aren't expecting to play a lot and who are just happy to help the next generation along. You don't want to end up in this situation like the process version of the 76ers, where it's a bunch of young guys and you develop a real losing culture because there's no one to kind of lead them and foster them and show them what it takes to be a pro. And so at least for next season for the Magic, their approach leading into next year, it needs to be more process driven as opposed to results driven. Are your young guys playing hard? Are they doing the right things? Are they just in general getting better every day? Don't worry about the wins and losses. Just worry about the improvements and really point to those and harp on those. That way, when you're not winning games, at least there's something to feel good about and there's something to keep you excited about and keep you working hard. At the end of the day, it was a bad season for Orlando, and that's not likely going to change for next year. But there's still plenty of reasons here to be optimistic if you're a Magic fan.